And we're live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Austin Petersen here, former presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. Thank you very much for tuning into this live stream YouTube. Today, we're going to be discussing a lot of current events, things that are of importance to our audience. And we've got a lot of people who are interested into this show today. We've had a lot of people sending in questions. We've got a very special guest. His name is Evan McMullin, and he is a former CIA operative as well as a former chief policy director for the House of Representatives. He's running as an independent candidate for president of the United States. Evan, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Austin. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for coming on. I know that this is kind of scary to come on because, just full disclosure, I have endorsed Governor Gary Johnson. I have been a libertarian for years, so I appreciate you manning up and coming out here and talking to my audience.
It's my pleasure. I view the libertarians as, brothers of conservatism, so brothers and sisters of conservatism. So I'm happy to speak with you.
Cool. Well, we don't always get along, so I'm sure we'll talk about some things we agree with, and then we'll discuss some things that maybe we don't. All right. So first off, what made you decide to run for president, Evan?
Well, look, I just think it's time in this country for a new generation of leadership. I had hoped that we would, on the Republican side, on the conservative side, have a better candidate this year. Frankly, I had my favorites, but I hoped that anyone but Donald Trump would be nominated. But of course, over time, it became clear that he would be the nominee. He's just somebody who I can't support. I believe that he poses a true threat to our country, to the cause of liberty, not only in the United States, but around the world. So when I realized then that no one else was going to step up and run as a true conservative to oppose Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, I was asked to consider it. And ultimately I decided, of course, that I had to do it if no one else would.
Was there a Republican that you did support initially?
Yes, in Virginia, I voted for Marco Rubio. I later supported Ted Cruz, but again, I would have been happy with any of them. Rand Paul, I sort of hoped would do better, but obviously he, didn't fare so well in the primaries. There were other candidates I could have gotten behind on the Republican side, but it just didn't play out that way.
Okay, how many states are you going to be on the ballot in, would you say?
Right now, we're on the ballot or registered as a write-in in 34 states. By the time we get to November 8th, it'll be 40 to 45. And that's plenty for our strategy, which is not a conventional strategy. We're not trying to win 270 votes. Of course, that would be great, but it's just not going to happen. This is a 3-month presidential campaign. So what we're trying to do is earn enough electoral votes to block Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump if the race between both of them is so close that we are able to do that by winning 1 or 2 states. So that's the idea. But if not that, then we will be happy to have prevented someone who I believe is a true authoritarian from taking power in the United States, and that's Donald Trump.
Were you aware of the sorts of challenges that were going to be faced by independent candidates such as yourself when you mounted your campaign?
Yes, in fact, that was one of the things. I mean, Austin, you were a candidate yourself, and what I've learned about this is that it's a deeply personal decision to get in. But in addition to all of the regular challenges and complications that a candidate has, there are ones that are particular to an independent candidacy. Ballot access is chief among them. Funding is another. There are so many. Right. But yes, I knew about them, and these are just things I had to decide. Am I going to do this even though it's difficult, or am I going to let those kinds of barriers stop me? Ultimately, I just believed so strongly that this was the right thing to do and that it needed to happen regardless of the challenges.
Okay, here's your first bias question here. What is your opinion of our disastrous war on drugs?
Our disastrous war on drugs. Well, I do think that we lock too many people up for nonviolent, usually drug crimes. I think that's having a terrible impact on especially the African American community. I think we need to focus more on rehabilitation and helping pull people away from drugs in a not through imprisonment, but through rehabilitation, as I said. So, I think we can be better. I mean, I also believe that states should be able to make the decision about drug use, drugs, the legality of drugs. I don't believe it should be a federal issue. I've said that before. I'm a strong Article or 10th Amendment guy. So that's sort of my view. But a lot of people would say, a lot of people attribute, I mean, look, drug use has gone up since 2000. There have been some highs and lows depending on the drug you're talking about. Laws have basically stayed the same. What I'm more concerned about is our epidemic of heroin use, opioids in the United States, and increasing, prescription drug use outside of the, prescribed uses. I'm concerned about that, and I think we probably share the goal that we need to figure out a way to decrease that. But my view is that it's through rehabilitation, not locking people up.
So would you use the DEA to initiate drug raids in states that have legalized marijuana like Colorado or Washington?
I think it should be. I think that should be left to the states. So my view is that the federal government would not be enforcing those laws. We would change the laws and let states decide.
Okay. Can you name a foreign leader that you admire?
A foreign leader that I admire? Yes, I can. I admire Benjamin Netanyahu. I believe that he is a strong national security leader in a very tough neighborhood. I admire Abe from Japan. I think he's navigated some very difficult economic waters for his country. And then there are several others that who I really don't like. I have a particular dislike for authoritarians and dictators. I speak about that a lot. Well, that's one of the reasons why I find Donald Trump's candidacy so troubling, is that he so admires and so pledges allegiance to Vladimir Putin and admires Saddam Hussein, Kim Jong-un, Bashar al-Assad, and others.
Do you think that our interventionist foreign policy has been a benefit to the national security of the United States?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it, first of all, like that, but you'd expect me to say that, Austin. I believe that we have overstepped in the case of Iraq, and I served in Iraq, and I'm proud of my service and the service of so many others there. But we made a mistake in going there. We made a mistake in occupying Iraq, and the way we did it also is extremely flawed. We didn't have a clear enough plan, and what we did plan was ineffective. But it was a mistake. It cost us a lot of money. And we would have been better off not to do it. So, but I also don't agree that, and I think this is where maybe we differ a lot, and maybe not, you'll tell me, but, I don't believe that it is in our best interest to disengage with the world. And if you'll allow me, I'll make a little case on that. I mean, just in the past couple of years, we see Ebola, we see Zika, we see cyber attacks, we see, an unprecedented expansion of Islamist terrorism. All of this is coming right at us, whether we like it or not. And we can choose to disengage from the world. And maybe you'd say, well, that's not exactly what I'm advocating for. But, I'll let you clarify that. But if the idea is that we should disengage from the world and just let whatever happens out there happen and we'll be okay, we won't be impacted with it, we're in a day and age when that's just not the case. So what I'm advocating for, Austin, is some middle ground. And what I mean by that is, let's not overstep. Let's not occupy countries that we absolutely don't need to occupy. Let's not do that. But at the same time, let's not disengage from the world, and let's get ahead of problems. Like, the Congress appropriated about $5 billion to respond to the Ebola crisis in West Africa. What I would say is, hey, we knew that health infrastructure there was awful in that corner of the world. Why not spend several $1 million maybe and help them create a health infrastructure that would have caught the problem and been able to stop the problem so that we wouldn't have to spend so much money and deploy the U.S. military over there? So I'm an advocate for a smarter foreign policy that engages earlier and at a much lighter level in terms of blood and treasure. When it comes to ISIS, for example, I don't know if you know this, but you mentioned that I was the chief policy director in the House of Representatives. So before I launched the campaign, and in August of 2013, the Iraqis came to us and said, "Hey, we've got ISIS camped out in the desert now. We can't destroy them because we can't project power out that far. If we don't destroy them, they're going to launch an offensive against our country." And we said, well, we can't help you. They came back a few months later, did the same thing. And then we didn't give them an answer. The Obama administration didn't answer them. Well, now we see what's happened since. It's the largest humanitarian disaster since World War II. We face increasing threats from terrorists around the world. What I would have, if I had been president then, I would have destroyed those camps, and it would have costed us a lot less. There would have been less casualties.
But don't you have, hold on just a moment, doesn't the president have to wait for constitutional authority to engage in that kind of action?
No, actually, the president does not. If the president engages in short-term military action, he has the power to do that by the War Powers Act. If it goes on for 90 days, 60 to 90 days, there are 30-day extensions, then he or she does need to seek approval from Congress. But for short engagements like that, no, the president does not.
Libertarians tend to believe that war is the health of the state. I know conservatives share concern about the growth of government. You don't fear misplaced power going to the executive branch with the president just taking action anytime he can without consulting Congress?
Well, no, I want to be very clear. I believe that the president has the authority, according to the Constitution, to lead the military and engagements. But according to the War Powers Act, if engagements are long-term, then he or she must seek congressional approval. So I do think those limits are appropriate. I support them. We don't always stick to them, as you well know. And I do think that's a problem. But for quick engagements, look, we live in a kind of world today where we've got to have a president who can make quick decisions about national security. Not long-term wars I'm talking about, but strikes, absolutely. We got to be able to do it.
Okay, well, you brought up strikes, and I've got another national security question for you. But I mean, isn't there a problem that the executive essentially has a kill list, that the president of the United States has the power to remove someone's life, liberty, and due process, in essence, without another branch of government signing off on that?
Are you talking about in the case of American citizens or foreigners?
Well, foreigners are one thing, but let's talk about Anwar al-Awlaki and his 16-year-old son who were killed by a drone strike. That was an extrajudicial assassination. So what is your opinion on extrajudicial assassinations?
Well, I believe that there should be due process. I'll say that, but I will also say that, look, guys like him and others, Americans who go join enemy forces who eat, drink, and sleep destroying us, I do believe they should be destroyed. But I also believe there should be due process. Right.
I think the problem that people have is when you give the power to remove life, liberty in the pursuit of happiness without due process, people get a little nervous that they get a itchy trigger finger. I mean, people may look at you and say, yeah I trust Evan McMullin, but then of course what happens when a Democrat takes power and then you've handed over that kind of power to your enemy. This is why our founders wanted separation of powers. That was one of the things that I discussed in my campaign, something we need to stick to. All right, so real quick question. Edward Snowden, hero or traitor?
I do believe that he raised important concerns about some things that shouldn't have been happening that were happening. I don't support the way he brought them to light. I think that he should have. There are channels for that, channels for whistleblowers. He would have found sympathetic representatives in Congress. He could have gone to Justin Amash. He could have gone to Rand Paul. These are members of Congress who would have understood that what he wanted to complain about needed to be complained about, and what he wanted to blow a whistle on should have been brought to the attention of the American people. So that's what I believe he should have done. He didn't do that. Instead, he ran to China and Russia, which I don't think is the right thing to do.
Would you give him a fair trial?
I would give it. Any trial in the United States should be fair, and absolutely I would. Absolutely.
Okay, what's your solution to the problems of police violence?
Well, I think it doesn't start with police violence. I think we need to solve a host of other issues that sort of become evident at the police violence level or at the conflict level between, say, the African American community and our police officers. For me, it's more about we need to think about those issues too. I support body cameras and all that, but we need to think about what's happening, for example, between the law enforcement community and the African American community. It seems like in many cases, the only time they come in contact is in some sort of tense law enforcement situation. It shouldn't be that way. There should be better bridges built, community policing. I think we need to look at poverty in our African American communities. I think we have, we've spent $21 trillion on anti-poverty programs since Johnson declared the war on poverty in the 1960s, and we still have a 15% poverty rate. So our programs aren't working. They need to not help people just survive in poverty, but actually help lift them out of poverty. We need to do more, I think, about criminal justice reform. We talked about drugs before and drug crimes. We're ripping a lot of African-American males away from their families, and that's doing enormous damage to those communities. I think we need to do something about that. We need to do something about education too. I'm a supporter of vouchers, for example, so people in low-income African-American communities ought to be able to take their kids to better schools, not the ones in those communities that tend to be so bad. We need to break that cycle. So I think there are just so many other issues.
Why do you hate children and want to take away their schools? All right, one more question. I want to move over to a different topic. What do you think about Trump's plan to deport 11 million people?
Well, I think it's, first of all, it's impractical. I think it's the wrong thing to do. It would hurt our economy, and I think it would rip apart families. And just, the thing, Austin, you'll probably appreciate this. Not a lot of people understand why I'm so concerned about this, but Trump says that he wants to raise a deportation force of, I think, 5,000 people. I hear that, and I think, my goodness, this is a threat to liberty in America. So how he would go about it, he would need to hire more people. Independent studies have said that. The last thing I want is Donald Trump responsible for hiring a brand new law enforcement agency in the United States. It's said that would be a terrible, terrible thing. I do think we need to enforce our laws. I do think we need to enforce or protect the border, secure the border. But look, immigration is an important part of our prosperity and our power. All of our families, most of our families were immigrants here. Mine certainly were, came, fleeing oppression and looking for religious liberty and for economic opportunity. At least a fourth of our entrepreneurs in this country are immigrants. We benefit so much economically and from a national security perspective from that. We need to be, friendly to immigration that helps us.
What do you think when Donald Trump calls for a religious test to enter the United States?
Well, I think it's a violation of what we stand for, and just about everything else he says, it's absolutely un-American. And this is why I'm calling on all Americans, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, to oppose Donald Trump. I do believe he is a true threat to our republic, and we need to ensure that he does not become the next president of the United States.
Okay. Two-part question. What do you think about gay marriage, both personally and from the level of government?
Well, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm a Mormon, and we believe in traditional marriage, and that's what I believe. I think it's the healthiest thing for society. However, I also believe that that individuals ought to be able to make their own decision about partnerships. But I also believe that this is a debate that hasn't been settled, but it warrants further debate. And if people like me want to make the case for traditional marriage, they ought to be able to do that. And people want to make the case for gay marriage or gay marriage rights, ought to be able to do that too. But what I am uncomfortable with is the idea that we would deprive people of the liberty to make that decision for themselves through the use of law.
One of the questions that was posed to Governor Johnson, I believe on The View, was a couple weeks ago. They were talking about traditional marriage, and they were trying to smear him, essentially saying because he believed in something of a separation of church and state or the legalization of same-sex marriage, they said that it would lead to things like polygamy. Do you think that polygamy should be legal?
I think it's once you open the door from traditional marriage, you do sort of beg the question of what would be the limitations on partnerships. So I think that's a debate that is there, and I think it's a valid debate. I'm uncomfortable, for example, with some of the ramifications of that, but we've still got a debate playing out in our country, and we're just getting started, I think, on that.
Okay, switching topics. What is your opinion on the Federal Reserve?
Austin, I'm just letting you know my team is telling me that I got to wrap up, but I do want to answer this question, and if you have another one, I can do that too.
Okay, actually, yeah. Answer that one really briefly, and I have one last question for you.
Yeah, I think we need a more transparent Federal Reserve. I'd like to see a rules-based monetary policy. I'd like the Fed to articulate its rules for monetary policy. I think we need to give them flexibility to make exceptions to those rules, but when they do, I think they need to report to Congress on that and explain why they do that. For abolishing the Fed, and I'm not for, I don't want to overly politicize it too, but I do think there needs to be more transparency in reporting.
Okay. All right. So last question. You seem to share a lot of policies that overlap with Governor Gary Johnson. So I think I'd be remiss to ask this. If there is a chance to actually break the two-party system this year, it seems as if, at least from polling numbers in some of these states, especially in the key state where you're doing well, like Utah, wouldn't it make sense to drop out and support Gary Johnson? I mean, why can't we all come together and unite behind a candidate that shares mostly our principles so that we can actually stop Trump and Hillary from taking the White House? I mean, is there some beef that you have with them? I mean, what's stopping you from supporting someone like Gary?
Look, if Gary Johnson were a true libertarian, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. That's the reality, Austin. If you were the libertarian nominee, I probably wouldn't be in the race. Let me put it that way. But Gary Johnson is not a real libertarian. I mean, some of his tax proposals and some of his ideas on religious liberty, they're just not libertarian. I'm sorry, but they're just not. And in addition to that, he's been doing some very strange things on the campaign trail in the past few weeks that have me questioning his suitability for the presidency or any other position of real responsibility. So, if you were the nominee, Austin, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd probably be backing you, but you weren't. And so here we are. And I would ask you if you would support me. That's what I would like to see. I would love to have your support.
I appreciate it.
Given the circumstances, I mean, if Johnson hadn't done, said some of the things he said over the past few weeks, then fine. But you're a smart guy. You've seen it too. You should have been the nominee, in my opinion. So
I appreciate that. I'm a man who sticks to my word, so I feel like that's important to do, especially if you're a man who seeks office, and I would expect the same thing from you. But best of luck in your campaign. Thanks very much for coming on the show today, Evan.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you.